Good evening and welcome back to Midnight Sleep Scientist, a small harbour for big questions, lit softly, the way a shoreline glows when the moon remembers it. If you're already lying down, let your shoulders loosen a little, as if untying a knot you didn't know you were holding. Tonight we're going to keep company with a paradox that has visited thinkers for centuries and lullabied the halls of physics for decades. How did nothing exist before the Big Bang? It's a question that sounds sharp at first, like a bell in cool air, and then, as we listen, it softens. Perhaps nothing isn't a single thing. Perhaps before dissolves when time is part of the story. Perhaps the universe began not with a shattering crack, but with a quiet smoothing, an opening of space the way dawn opens the sky. Slowly, steadily, without a seam. We'll take our time. We'll visit the physicist's vacuum, which isn't empty at all. We'll look gently at inflation and horizons, at ideas that suggest no edge, no before, only a rounded beginning. We'll keep caveats nearby, like warm blankets for the mind. And if sleep arrives mid-sentence, that's perfectly all right. This is a place where curiosity and rest can share the same pillow. If you're still awake later, and only if you'd like, feel free to share where you're listening from tonight. I always picture little points of light across the world, a constellation of sleepy minds drifting through the same question. For now, settle in. Let's begin. Imagine a room with the lights off. Not quite darkness. There's always some gentle grain to the night, but close. Your ears begin to notice the hush between small sounds. A soft appliance hum, a distant car, your own breath threading the stillness. In moments like these, we sometimes say we're surrounded by nothing. No noise, no movement, nothing happening. Philosophers have long guarded a different nothing, a stricter kind. No matter, no space, no time, no laws, no anything. A kind of absolute blank, beyond imagination, because imagination needs a place to sit. It's an ideal more than a picture, and when we try to hold it still, it slips through our fingers. What does absence look like when there's no eyes, no light, no place? We can speak the phrase, but the mind paints anyway. And yet, even the quiet room trembles with life. The air is a sea of molecules drifting, bumping, swapping tiny parcels of momentum. The walls hold stories in their atoms. Your heart persuades blood to wander its familiar rivers. The room isn't empty, it's simply calm. Our everyday nothing is usually just not much. And then there's the hinge word before. Before is a time word. It leans on the arrow we follow from breakfast to sunset, from childhood to the present moment, where your pillow cups the shape of your cheek. But what if time itself is part of the universe? Not a hallway it moved through to get here. If time is woven into the same fabric as space, then speaking of a time before, the whole fabric might be like asking for the path outside a map that already contains every road. Physicists, meanwhile, speak of another kind of nothing, the vacuum. In textbooks, it's often introduced as empty space, stripped of particles, and then, in the very next breath, described as restless, structured, full of fields that can never fully be quiet. Not a contradiction exactly, but a reminder that words travel farther than they should. Empty isn't really empty. The vacuum is a physical something, like a fabric that can stretch, ripple, and carry charge in forms we meet as particles. From the start, then, our question branches into a small grove of meanings. The paradox softens once we admit we've been using a single word for many ideas. The nothing of experience is low activity. The nothing of philosophy is pure absence. The nothing of physics is a specific state of the world, one with properties, energy, and structure. When we ask how nothing existed before the Big Bang, we need to be gentle about which one we mean, because each points to a different kind of answer. In the stories we inherit, beginnings often need a cause outside themselves, a spark, a hand, a push. But modern cosmology suggests a subtler possibility. Instead of an explosion in space, we meet an expansion of space. Instead of a ticking clock behind the scenes, we meet time as one of the actors, and wherever actors stand, there is a stage. In physics, that stage is built from fields, mathematical objects that live everywhere, even when they seem to say nothing. In that sense, the phrase before the Big Bang may be asking for a hallway that wasn't there to be walked, a silence that is still a kind of song. Perhaps that's why the question feels like a bell. It rings cleanly, then blooms into overtones that don't quite match. We feel its call, we sense it means something, but the meaning takes its time. Like night vision, it improves in the dark. For a moment, notice your breath, the rise, the fall, the small pause in between. In those pauses, you taste something like nothing. No inhale, no exhale, yet your body is busy in the background. A hush that hums. The universe's beginnings may be like this. A pause that isn't empty, a calm with structure, a quiet out of which other quiets grow. Think of winter fields. From a distance they look bare, pale, almost blank. Yet beneath the frost, seeds bide their time. Soil harbors maps, drawn in chemistry. Sleep isn't the absence of life. It's life arranged differently. If the universe had a beginning without a before, perhaps it was like winter's hush filled with the readiness of something that doesn't yet have a name. None of this is certain. The early universe is a frontier, and our instruments read the past by the light that survived. We make careful inferences, then cradle them with caveats. But a pattern emerges. Whenever we try to push nothing into a single corner, it leaks out into many rooms. Our task tonight isn't to trap it, but to sit with it, to learn the shapes it takes when we think carefully, and to notice which shapes help us rest. You don't need to solve the paradox. You're allowed to drift. Let the mind loosen its fist around the word nothing, as if dropping a pebble into still water and watching the rings widen, then fade. The next chapters will take us into the physicist's vacuum and its gentle mischief. We'll see why emptiness, at least in physics, behaves more like a quiet meadow in spring than a desert with no wind. For now, breathe. The night is patient. The question will be here when you return from sleep. If you could shrink yourself to a scale far smaller than atoms, smaller than the paths electrons prefer, smaller even than the distance a photon needs to notice a change, what would you find in empty space? Perhaps a smooth black stillness, a perfect untextured quiet. Not quite. Physics suggests that the most stripped-down space we can speak of, the vacuum, is more like the surface of a lake seen from very, very close. From the shore, the water looks calm. From inches away, you notice tiny corrugations, a private weather of ripples. Go closer still, and motion refuses to vanish. The surface is never perfectly still. Even on a windless night it trembles, held by laws that do not permit absolute silence. In quantum field theory, every kind of particle we know, electrons, photons, quarks, arises as a ripple in an underlying field that fills all of space. The field is the lake, the ripple is the particle. Remove all the ripples, no electrons darting, no photons roaming, and the lake remains. The vacuum is that lake without waves. And yet, because of quantum rules, the surface can't flatten to zero. It jitter fluctuates, as if the possibility of waves keeps the water awake. These fluctuations are often called zero-point motion. Even at the lowest energy allowed, the fields cannot be perfectly still. It's a constraint set by the structure of the theory itself, a promise the universe refuses to break. We can't scoop these momentary ripples into a jar, but we can measure their effects. They slightly shift energy levels in atoms, tug on plates placed close together, and leave fingerprints in phenomena we otherwise might have called magic. Quiet fingerprints, but real. So the physicist's nothing contains fields. It has geometry, it has moods, in a sense, determined by which symmetries it keeps and which it lets go. Change the state of the vacuum, and you change what can appear as particles, how they move, how they gather into families. Vacuum, then, isn't a blank page. It's a page with a faint watermark structure that shows when you hold it to the light. This may feel like a trick of words. If the vacuum has things in it, haven't we stolen the meaning of nothing? Perhaps. Or perhaps we've discovered that the word was doing too much work. In physics, nothing is what remains when you remove matter and radiation. You strip, 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 and still you are left with a medium whose properties govern the dance to come. You might ask, if the vacuum already has structure, are we smuggling the universe in through the back door? But notice how generous this emptiness is. You don't need to place particles by hand if the fields are already present. You don't need to build space on scaffolding if the fabric is already woven. The vacuum is the condition that allows anything at all to be, not as something created from nothing, but as something emerging from a state that looked blank to a coarser gaze. Imagine an empty theatre before a concert. The seats are quiet. The stage is bare. From the lobby, it's easy to call it nothing happening, but the room carries acoustics shaped by wood and air. The strings of the instruments, resting, still hold their tensions. The score exists, silent, in memory and notation. When the music begins, it feels natural, as if the hall has been waiting for it, designed to let it bloom. The vacuum in this gentle analogy is the hall. The music is the excitations we later call matter, light, and the bright web of things. Sometimes, physicists speak of the energy of empty space, the vacuum energy, as if the fabric itself had a faint glow, a pressure that doesn't thin out with distance. This idea softens the universe's expansion in ways we witness through distant light. But the details are delicate. Numbers that seem large in calculation must be tamed by other pieces of the puzzle, or else the story rushes ahead without us. Where the balance comes from remains a question, with corners we haven't yet lit. If all of this sounds slippery, that's because we are walking on ice we trust. But still watch carefully. Quantum fields are sturdy mathematics, with a century of experimental conversation behind them, and yet their deepest meaning may keep a private root. What matters for us tonight is the shape of the claim. Even empty space behaves. It can be stretched. It can be curved by mass and energy. It can carry the standing possibilities of particles that haven't yet appeared. In this sense, nothing is less like an absence and more like a readiness. There's a quiet comfort in this. It suggests that becoming is not a violent rupture from zero, but a natural flowering of what the vacuum already allowed. Seeds don't break a contract with the soil when they sprout. They fulfill it. The universe may have sprouted from conditions that were not truly empty at all, conditions encoded in the very way space exists. But what about before? If the vacuum is part of space and space begins with the universe, can we place this vacuum outside the beginning? Perhaps not. Perhaps the more helpful thought is that questions of before rely on a clock that ticks only once the stage opens. If time is woven with space, then the vacuum state of the earliest moments isn't an ingredient waiting elsewhere. It is the universe's first breath, the texture of the opening line. Let your jaw unclench, if it feels kind to do so. Notice how the body treats stillness. Even at rest, there's a low hum. Tiny muscles settle and adjust. The heart keeps its rhythm. You might call this doing nothing, but life would disagree. In the same way, empty space is busy in invisible ways. Its activity a baseline rather than a disturbance. We will, soon, wander toward another gentling idea, that the earliest measurable moments of our cosmos were shaped by a phase called inflation, a smoothing stretch that set the stage for galaxies to fold themselves from small ripples. Inflation is often pictured as a brief, astonishing swell, but we'll speak of it softly as a calm expansion that quieted roughness and made the sky nearly even, all the way round. Before that, another breath. It's enough for now to carry this single sentence into the drift of sleep. In physics, nothing is a kind of something, and that something has a talent for becoming. There's a particular hush that arrives just before dawn, as if the world is briefly holding its breath. Birds haven't quite begun their bright arithmetic. Streets are empty. Even the light seems undecided, a grey suggestion rather than a fact. In that lull, before feels simple. Before dawn is night. Before night is evening. Before evening is afternoon. A neat bead string of moments, one after another, the way we learn to count. But when we ask about the beginning of the universe, the bead string phrase, time itself may be part of what began. The thread is not something outside the beads, but woven with them, and if the thread is inside the necklace, asking for the bead before the first bead becomes a kind of poetry, not a map. Physics offers several ways to think of time, and each carries its own softness and its own caution. One picture is almost painterly. All moments exist at once, like a landscape spread across a canvas. This block view suggests that past and future are simply regions of the same picture, and our sense of moving through them is a feature of how we as living systems process change. Another picture is more musical. Time is a performance, unfolding note by note with the past recorded and the future still in rehearsal. We don't yet know which of these pictures, if either, captures the deepest truth. Perhaps both are approximations, like two sketches of the same mountain from different sides. What we do meet, reliably, is a direction, an arrow that points from what we remember toward what we do not. We call it the arrow of time. It leans into the future the way a river leans downhill, and its tilt is tied to entropy, the measure we use for disorder, or more gently, for the number of ways a system might quietly be. A neat arrangement, letters in a row, cards all in suit, has few ways to stay neat. Nudge it, and the neatness fades. A messy arrangement has many ways to remain messy. Entropy grows, not by law as strict as gravity's pull, but as a nearly certain tide. The universe, it seems, began in a low entropy state, a tidy origin whose tidiness has been unspooling ever since. This raises a tender puzzle. Why was it so tidy? Why were the conditions at or near the beginning arranged in a way that allowed so much increase to follow? If the arrow of time is an arrow of increasing entropy, then the source of its direction lies in a boundary condition, a past that was special. Some thinkers imagine that the early cosmos simply was that way, no deeper why required. Others search for mechanisms, processes that naturally produce low entropy beginnings when space and time are young, perhaps through phases of rapid smoothing that we'll touch soon. We don't have a final answer, only hints that the hush that preceded the cosmic orchestra was curiously ordered. There is also the quiet reminder that before may not belong in the sentence at all. If time is part of the universe's fabric, asking what came before the beginning is like asking what is north of the North Pole. The map itself is drawn so that north is a direction within it. There is no latitude outside the drawing where north of north can live. In some proposals, the beginning is not a fragile edge, but a rounded region where our idea of prior simply doesn't apply. The curve of the earth smoothly closes. The curve of time may, in some descriptions, do something similar, and yet our language leans on before because our lives do. We lace our days with causes and effects, with starts and finishes, with plans that unfold like paper boats on a stream. So perhaps a different question is kinder. How did time acquire its arrow? What made the future feel open and the past feel settled? Here the story becomes bodily. Records form, memories write themselves into the structure of brains and stones. Stars forge elements that linger in the dust of later worlds. All of this depends on the ease with which energy flows from concentrated forms, hot stars, chemical gradients into diffuse warmth. The asymmetry that lets tea cool but not spontaneously reheat is the same asymmetry that lets life exist and wonder. Entropy's swell gives us a one-way street, and on that street, stories can be told. There are edges to this understanding. The most extreme early moments, so early we give them names like Planck era, sit beyond our tested theories. The physics we lean on now may need a new language when curvatures and energies press together that tightly. In such regions, the very distinction between space and time might blur. Quantities we treat as continuous may arrive in quanta, like the notes on a music box. If time has a grain, those grains are too fine for our current senses to feel. But even there, in the place where our equations begin to stutter, we can carry a simple humility. Before might be a word with no purchase, because the thing it points to, the flow of moments, hadn't yet congealed into flow. It can help to invite a small sensory thought. Feel your pulse in your thumb, perhaps. A faint drumline under the skin. Between pulses, there is a gap that feels like a tiny before. But your body's unfolding is not a series of isolated beats. It is a continuous weave of processes, with many rhythms stacked: heartbeat, breath, slow circadian tides. Time in your body is not a ruler, but a choreography. The cosmos may be similar. What we call a moment might be a relational thing, defined by processes rather than by an absolute metronome ticking in an empty hall. In our daily language, clocks are neutral witnesses of time. In deeper physics, a clock is a physical system, a pendulum, an atom's oscillation, a light bouncing between mirrors, and what it measures depends on where it travels and how. In curved space-time, near heavy masses, or in states of rapid motion, different clocks disagree about how much time has passed. This isn't a failure, it's the geometry playing through. When we try to extrapolate that geometry back to the earliest possible regions, time's meaning becomes even more contextual. It suggests that asking what happened before the beginning may be like asking whose clock gets to define before, when the very possibility of clocks is just arriving. To ground this in a more earthly picture, think of a river's source. At a certain distance downstream, the river is obvious. Banks, current, the sound of water. Walk toward the headwaters, and the shape gentles into a braid of trickles, then into moist ground, then into snowmelt, then into a cloud's brief gift. Where exactly does the river begin? The answer depends on the scale you choose. Time's origin may keep a similar softness. At large scales, our cosmic river is clear. At smaller scales, the distinctions between stream, spring, and sky may blur into a weather of possibilities. Another tender thread. Some proposals suggest time might be emergent, not fundamental, like temperature, which is a property of many particles humming together rather than a basic ingredient of a single atom. Time could be a description that becomes meaningful when many degrees of freedom settle into patterns. If so, asking for time before time is like asking for wetness before water, a question that dissolves as you realize the property only appears when enough pieces gather, when the lake exists. You don't need to hold any single model tightly. Let them drift like lanterns on a quiet bay. What matters is the relief they offer. Our confusion about before isn't a failure of imagination. It is a sign that our intuition, forged inside an ongoing universe with steady clocks, is meeting a domain where the rules change their grammar. In that place, humility is not just polite, it is accurate. Notice the room again, the slight coolness on your cheeks, or warmth under the blanket. The way time stretches when you are almost asleep, then contracts when dreams lean in. Our experience of time is elastic, and this elasticity is a small echo of deeper flexibility in nature's story. If the universe truly had no before, or if before turns inward and becomes a different kind of relation, then perhaps the better lullaby is this. The beginning was not a cliff, but a curve, a gentle turning where questions about prior fade, not because they were solved, but because they no longer fit the shape of things. When dawn finally arrives, it never argues with the night that came before. It simply happens, seamlessly, as if the world had been caring for the moment long in advance. The cosmos's first lights may have been like that. No countdown, no backstage clock, just the fabric becoming itself, and time, as part of that fabric, learning how to flow. Close with that image if you like, a curved horizon, not sharp, but softened by distance. And on the far side of the curve, not before but the quiet from which before and after will later be made. When people hear Big Bang, the mind often paints fireworks. A central point, a sudden blast, fragments flying into pre-existing space. It's a vivid picture, and it misleads us. The modern view is gentler. The Big Bang is not an explosion in space. It is the expansion of space itself. No center, no outside air, no shrapnel, just distances growing between almost everything and almost everything else. Imagine you are resting on a sleeping bag scattered with small crumbs of paper. Underneath, someone slowly stretches the fabric. The crumbs drift apart, not because they're moving on their own, but because the ground between them is lengthening. Each crumb sees every other crumb receding. To any crumb, it looks as if it is at the center of the stretching, because the expansion is uniform. That's the key. From anywhere, the story is the same. There is no privileged middle, no edge with a view of an outside. In this stretching, the early universe was hot and dense, not because it was compressed into a pinprick within some larger room, but because the scale of the room itself was much smaller. The light trapped there was energetic. Particles jostled in a thick soup as expansion continued. The soup thinned, cooled, and allowed new structures to appear. What we call the Big Bang model is our carefully tested description of this smoothing, cooling expansion and the simple rules that guided chemistry and light as the universe relaxed. Light carries memory. When the universe cooled enough for electrons to settle into gentle companionship with protons forming neutral atoms, light decoupled from matter and began to travel more freely. That faint afterglow, stretched by expansion into microwaves, paints the sky in all directions. It is astonishingly uniform, with tiny fluctuations like the quiet grain in twilight. We bathe in that glow even now. It threads through every room. Those subtle variations map the initial seeds from which galaxies would later gather. The way slight dips in a mattress invite feathers to settle. Before that decoupling, other milestones arrived in a slow parade. Once the temperature fell to a particular range, atomic nuclei formed, mostly hydrogen and helium, with delicate traces of lithium. This episode, called the Time of Light Nuclei Building, is one of the model's triumphs. From a few general ingredients and known reaction rates, it predicts the cosmic recipe we observe. It is as if the oven of the universe ran through a standard setting, and we can still taste the proportions in the dough. The expansion did not end that day. It continued, and in the slightly denser places, thanks to those tiny fluctuations, gravity encouraged matter to gather. Gas pooled. The first stars lit, their cores hot enough to forge heavier elements. Those stars lived, burned, and many died, spilling their newly minted atoms back into space, where they could become parts of planets, rocks, and later bodies that wonder about beginnings. We are, as the saying goes, star stuff. But more than that, we are time's slow handiwork, the result of expansion and cooling, of aggregation and recycling, of an unhurried patience that lets complexity frost the universe like a delicate rhyme. All along, the expansion frames the stage. It sets the scale for distances, the beat for how often galaxies meet. It also introduces an idea that feels both inviting and a little wistful: horizons. Because light takes time to travel, there are regions from which light, even traveling since the earliest decoupling, hasn't had time to reach us. Not because something bars the way, but because space has stretched so much that the path lengthens faster than the light can close it. These are horizons of communication. We may never exchange messages with those regions. We may never know their particular stories. And yet, their existence is part of the universe's plain speech. A horizon is not a wall. It is a soft limit born from the race between expansion and light. If the Big Bang was not an explosion, what was the bang in the phrase? Historically, it was a nickname, originally a bit of a tease, for a theory that suggested a hot, dense beginning. Over time, the name stuck, as names so often do. We can keep the nickname if we remember its boundaries. The bang was not a boom, it was an everywhere. The everywhere was not in anything else, it was itself the room. Sometimes, when we follow the equations back, we reach a time when the densities grow so large that our tools lose their grip. Beyond that, the symbols suggest they point toward a singularity, a place where quantities blow up and stop making sense. But most physicists treat such singularities not as physical pinpricks, but as signs that our theory is asking for a new chapter. Just as the classical idea of a smooth lake needed quantum ripples to tell the fuller story, our smooth description of space-time may need a quantum weave to understand the deepest past. In that weave, the beginning might be a change of phase, a bounce, or a rounded edge that gently avoids sharpness. The safe answer is, we don't know yet, but our ignorance is a fertile field, not a desert. Refocusing on the observable, we can walk a timeline in plain steps. There was a time of extreme heat, where particles and light mingled freely, then a time of nuclei forming, then a time when atoms could hold onto their electrons and the fog cleared. This is when the afterglow began its long journey. Then a time of gathering and starbirth, of galaxies assembling into filaments and clusters, a cosmic lace. Later, after many cycles of starlight and darkness, planets grew, cooled, and some learned to carry oceans. On at least one of them, small chemistries became large stories, and those stories learned to speak. The pace of this story is not uniform. Many of the early steps unfold quickly, measured in heartbeats of the young cosmos. Later steps stretch into billions of years, generous and slow. The scale change is part of the lullaby. What began as a sprint became a stroll. Even now, expansion continues, and on very large scales it seems to be accelerating, as if empty space itself carries a faint push. Whether this push is a property of the vacuum or a sign of something we haven't yet named remains open, but its effect is calm. Distant galaxies recede more quickly, and the sky's great structure becomes more and more diffuse. It's natural to ask, what expands into what? The answer is shy. Space doesn't expand into another space. It simply stretches. The question assumes an outside room. Our best models don't include that room. They describe the interior geometry, and within that interior, distances grow. A helpful image is a pattern stitched on flexible fabric. When you stretch the fabric, the stitches separate. You do not need a second fabric to make this true. The change is internal. If you like, picture the early universe as a warm fog, humming with potential. As it thinned, sound could travel farther, light could wander without constant interruption, and structure began to appear. There is tenderness in that image, form emerging from formlessness, not as an act of violence, but as a slow condensation of possibilities into shapes. Our equations, austere on the page, are, in their way, descriptions of that tenderness. None of this requires you to hold the details while sleep curls toward you. It is enough to keep a single, clarifying substitution, replace explosion with expansion, replace outside with everywhere, replace bang with beginning of stretching. The rest can blur, like stars through half-closed eyes. As you settle deeper, notice how your own day resembles the cosmic arc. There is a hot, busy morning of tasks, an afternoon where forms take shape, an evening where expansion becomes a gentle drift, and a night where everything cools, readying itself for tomorrow's small genesis. The universe's story is on a different canvas, vastly larger, but the rhythm is familiar. Perhaps that is why it soothes. We hear our own pulse in its long wavelength song, before we move, in time, to the smoothing phase called inflation, a chapter that will be quiet rather than abrupt. Let the mind set down a last simple truth. The Big Bang is our name for the universe, remembering how to be spacious, not a shatter, but a stretch, not a blast, but a breath, and in the breath between now and sleep, that is more than enough. Picture a fogged window on a winter morning. At first the glass is cloudy and close, the world beyond only a smudge of colour. Then, without hurry, a warm hand smooths the fog in one slow circle. Edges sharpen, distant shapes come into view. What was mottled becomes even, what was near becomes wide. Inflation, in the language of cosmology, is something like that gentle clearing, an early rapid smoothing of the universe that made the far look familiar and the whole look nearly the same in every direction. We enter softly, in the first fractions of a second, so early that those words feel more like poetry than timekeeping. The universe might have entered a state in which a particular kind of energy dominated. Instead of behaving like a fluid that thins as space stretches, this energy acted almost constant, like a quiet pressure baked into the fabric itself. Under such a condition, space doesn't merely expand, it accelerates in its expansion, doubling and doubling again, ironed smooth the way a sheet loses its wrinkles under a slow palm. This idea was invented to soothe several small discomforts. Why is the universe so uniform on large scales, when far apart regions seem never to have had time to share a common story? Why is the geometry we see so close to flat, as if the cosmic tabletop has no obvious curve? Why do we find so few odd remnants, monopoles and other exotic relics, that some early theories seem to forecast? A brief swelling does quiet these concerns. Regions once close enough to swap messages were pulled apart. Their common temperature and character were carried outward. Curvature was stretched so thin that, to our measuring sticks, it looks like zero. Exotic debris was diluted into near nothing. The fogged window clears. The world behind it appears serenely even. In many versions, this stretching is driven by a field, a cousin to the fields we spoke of earlier, slowly rolling through a landscape of potential energy. As long as it lingers high in that landscape, the universe swells quickly. When it settles lower, the swelling eases, the energy converts into other forms, and the familiar hot, dense plasma of the later Big Bang story takes over. In this way, inflation is not the whole origin, but a prelude that hands the baton to the well-tested expansion we can read in the sky. There is, too, a quieter magic hiding inside the math. During inflation, tiny quantum jitters in the field, microscopic bumps, hardly more than the universe's own breath, are swept outward and frozen into the fabric as slight variations in density. Over ages, gravity leans into these variations, encouraging matter to gather a bit more here, a bit less there. The grand web of galaxies with its filaments and clusters and vast empty rooms may trace back to whispers laid down during that smoothing. In this way, the night's largest lacework comes from the softest seeds. We read the echoes of these seeds in the cosmic afterglow. The faint mottling of that microwave light has a pattern almost, but not quite, the same at all scales, that our telescopes have learned to hum. It's as if the early universe played a chord and the sky still resonates. Many variations of inflation produce chords like this. The details, though, are tender. Different tunes hum slightly differently, and we listen again and again to tell which melody best fits the room. The notion of horizons enters the scene naturally here. Imagine standing on a broad plain with a light mist rising. You can see out to a circle of distance. Beyond that, the world fades. In cosmology, a horizon is the farthest reach from which light could have arrived since the beginning of transparent time. Because inflation pulled regions apart so quickly, many areas now on our sky were once close, like neighboring cottages before the plain grew between them. Hence the paradox dissolves. Their common temperature is no longer mysterious. They once shared a hearth. There are different kinds of horizons in the cosmic vocabulary, and they speak to different limits. A particle horizon tells us how far light has managed to travel since the earliest eras. It marks the boundary of what we could have seen by now. Even in principle, an event horizon is subtler. It draws the line between places that could ever exchange light with us in the future, and those that will forever drift beyond conversation. Not because anything blocks the way, but because expansion outpaces every message. In a universe where the stretching accelerates even today, those event horizons are not just history, they are the architecture of our long tomorrow. All of this may sound grand and certain, but inflation, for all its successes, is still a model, written with chalk, we're willing to rewrite. It composes a calm melody that fits much of the data, yet the orchestra's score is not complete. Which field? Which landscape? How, exactly, did the energy settle into the hot plasma that followed? We have sketches, and some are graceful, but the painting is not finished. This uncertainty need not pinch. It is the good kind, the kind that leaves room for sleep, because the mind knows the work will be there to greet it in the morning. You might ask whether inflation itself creates space, or whether it simply stretches what is already there. In most tellings, stretching is enough. What matters is not conjuring room from nothing as much as changing the scale of relations within the room. Those relations, distances, causal neighbors, the ability to communicate shift dramatically in a way that writes itself into the sky we see, a small parallel from daily life. When a pot of thick soup warms on the stove, tiny fluctuations become patterns, convective rolls, gentle swirls, brief filigrees of motion. Temperature differences drive the order. In the cosmos, the driver is not warmth, but the particular pressure of the inflating state. The result, translated across unimaginable scales, is similar. Modest seeds, then forms, a smoothing, then structure, and then there is the human horizon, that tender circle formed by the distance light has travelled from. Who you have been to who you are. Memory is your afterglow. Small fluctuations, choices, chance meetings were stretched across a life into constellations of meaning. The wide quiet beyond those choices is not empty. It is simply beyond the reach of the messages you could send. When we look up and see a horizon in the sky, we are seeing a version of ourselves writ large. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture that winter window again. The fog, the slow sweep, the world behind it emerging, even and calm, hold that image as the essence of inflation. Not a blast, but a smoothing. Not noise, but a hush. Not certainty, but a gentle answer to why the far looks so much like the near. Then let it fade, as horizons do, into a night that invites rest. At the edge of a lake in late evening, the shore curves in a way your feet understand. There is no abrupt stop to the water, no cliff. The surface simply turns, meeting land in a rounded line that feels inevitable. Some proposals for the universe's beginning carry this same softness. They suggest that what we think of as a starting edge may be more like a curve. No boundary to bang against, no before in need of explanation, only a region where our idea of time changes its grammar. One of the most evocative is the no boundary idea. In this picture, near what we would call the beginning, the difference between time and space blurs. Time for a brief domain behaves less like a direction and more like an extra kind of space. The geometry closes smoothly, like the surface of a sphere. Ask for a point before, and you are asking for a place north of the North Pole. The map simply curves away, complete without a border. The universe then emerges into the familiar regime, where time is time again, and history is unfold. This may sound like sleight of hand, but it's an act of kindness to our language. When we push equations to their sharpest points, they often protest by producing infinities, signs that the tools we're using need handles wrapped in softer cloth. The no-boundary proposal is such a cloth. It invites us to consider histories that are finite yet unbounded, a way for the cosmos to be whole, without requiring a summit beyond which the trail must have begun. A sibling idea carries a different flavor, tunneling from nothing. Here, nothing is not a philosophical void, but a state with no classical space-time, no room with a grid of distances, no clock with a hand to sweep. From that state, the universe could, in a manner of speaking, quantum tunnel into being, the way particles sometimes slip through barriers they cannot classically cross. These words strain, because we are translating equations into domestic metaphors. But the heart of the thought is that beginnings can be probabilistic events within a deeper framework where before has no foothold. There are other gentle models that keep the night company. Bounce cosmologies, for instance. Picture the early universe not as the first act, but as the latest stanza in a long poem. A prior phase, contracting rather than expanding, might have reached a minimum size, then rebounded into our current growth. In some versions, that prior contraction is chopped and quieted by a smoothing phase, an apocalyptic hush that drains away wrinkles before the turn. In others, quantum effects in the geometry itself, if space-time has a granular weave, prevent a true collapse, enforcing a bounce the way compressing a spring stores energy and demands release. Cyclic stories extend this to many rounds. Expansion, smoothing, cooling, then a new contraction and a return, perhaps with each cycle writing a fresh verse in slightly altered ink. These tales have a wistful beauty. They also carry questions. How is entropy managed from cycle to cycle? How do we keep the ledger balanced so that disorder does not simply accumulate beyond repair? Different authors offer different accountings. Some place the bookkeeping in vast stretches or selective erasers. But as with lullabies, the tune matters as much as the arithmetic. We listen for melodies that match the sky. What unites these models is not their agreement, but their humility. Each tries to remove the sharpness at the earliest edge, to grant the universe a beginning without a brutal corner. Each is careful to ask, what could we observe? The afterglow's pattern, the distribution of structures, the subtle polarization of ancient light. These are the clues they offer to the night watch. So far, the most enduring signals align with a softly inflated start, but the door remains open to refinements and cousins that smooth in other ways. It helps to return to our meanings of nothing. In the no-boundary sense, nothing is not an empty warehouse. It is a statement that the geometry closes, that there is no prior shore. In bounce narratives, nothing is not required at all. The story extends like a braid through a throat where densities peak and then thin again. In tunneling pictures, nothing means no classical space-time yet. No stage, though a deeper probabilistic rulebook still hums. In every case, nothing isn't a contentless vacuum. It is the absence of certain structures we take for granted. Clocks, rulers, the smooth continuum. while other mathematical structures remain busy in the background. If that feels like a compromise, it is. But compromise is often where truth rests its head. Our words evolve to gossip about oranges and rain, not to cradle the first instance of a universe. When we ask them to do that work, they squint, then shrug, so we let the math hum in its corner and keep our metaphors soft. Rounded edges, curving shores, a throat that narrows, then opens. A page that begins without a margin line. Each image invites ease rather than insistence. Chronology in these ideas becomes a ribbon with different textures rather than a ruler with numbered ticks. In a no-boundary story, earlier simply loses meaning past a certain curve. In a bounce tale, earlier belongs to a recognizably different phase, one whose physics may rhyme with ours, but sing a lower note. In a tunneling picture, earlier is not part of the cast. The event is a springing into that doesn't need an offstage hour. Consider the human parallels that arrive, unbidden when we slow down. Sleep itself has a rounded edge. There is no last precise moment when you can point and say, here, this is the border. Wakefulness softens, thought blurs, and then a new regime holds you. Dreams are not a place before or after, they are a mode. When you return, you rarely demand a map of the exact threshold. You accept the curve. Perhaps the universe did too. If you like, trace a small chronology in plain language, careful not to tug too hard. There is a calm region that, in one proposal, closes smoothly with no prior. There is a smoothing, a quick settling of creases. There is a handover to the hot expansion, the afterglow's birth, the long ages of gathering and light, the patient makeup of elements and worlds, and finally, the quiet rooms where we ask what it meant to start. Whether a bounce preceded this, whether the shoreline curved rather than cut, whether tunneling served as the bridge, each story places its lantern along the same path, lighting different stones. We do not need to choose tonight. We can rest in the knowledge that the sharpest edges may be illusions of our framing. The universe, like the lake at dusk, may be more rounded than our first glance guessed, and we can trust that if a model is true in the way nature uses the word true, it will make itself measurable, perhaps in the fine grain of the sky's oldest light, perhaps in a pattern that repeats across scales, perhaps in a silence where a signal should have been. Let your shoulders sink a little deeper. Let the mind pause on a simple image, a globe in your hands, smooth under your palms. You travel north, then farther north, until every step is shorter and every direction becomes south. There is no before north. The map completes itself without a border. If the beginning of time was like that, rounded, finite, edgeless, then the question what was before dissolves, not by being answered, but by being replaced with a quieter knowing that the shore curved, the lake was whole, and in that wholeness, the first dawn could rise without a reason from outside the day. We'll carry this softness forward. Ahead lie the ways symmetries can't help but tilt, how a poised state slides into variety, and why something from nothing might be less a conjuring trick and more a natural tendency toward becoming. For now, rest with the curve. It is enough. On a windless pond at dusk, the water holds a perfect reflection. The trees along the bank repeat themselves. The sky doubles, and for a soft minute, the world seems to wear two faces with one expression. Symmetry is a kind of quiet like that, an evenness that asks nothing of us, a poised balance where no direction is special. Nature at deep levels seems to love such poise. The fundamental equations we lean on, those soft-spoken rules beneath particles and light, often begin their lives symmetric, impartial, the way still water agrees equally with every ripple that might cross it. And yet the world we inhabit is not perfectly even. Left and right can differ in delicate ways. Forces wear different strengths. Masses gather into distinct families. Somewhere between the poised surface and the textured shore, something tilts. The tilt is not always forced from the outside. Sometimes symmetry gives way by itself. We call this spontaneous symmetry breaking, and it is gentler than the phrase suggests. Imagine a pencil balanced perfectly on its tip, an ideal fragile balance. In theory, the pencil respects every direction equally. It could fall north, south, anywhere on the circle. In practice, a whisper of air, a grain in the wood, a vibration too small to name. Something tips it. The fall chooses a direction. The laws underneath were even. The outcome is not. The symmetry still exists in the rulebook, but the state of the world has selected a particular verse. You've seen versions of this in quiet places. A pond that suddenly wears a skin of ice. The water's molecules were jostling in every which way. As the temperature drops, they prefer a crystalline pattern, repeating like a lullaby. The laws didn't change. The conditions did. New structure appears, almost as if from nothing, not conjured, but invited by the symmetry's decision to hide part of itself. Dew on morning grass carries the same lesson. Above a certain coolness, vapor chooses to be bead and shine rather than invisible drift. The choice is not willed, it is the landscape's tendency revealing itself. In particle physics, the vacuum, the lowest energy condition of a field, can carry this kind of preference. Some fields are happiest not at a neat zero, but at a nizai resting value. The way a hammock is most at ease when it sags. We call this a vacuum expectation value. When the field settles into that sag, the world's symmetries are no longer manifest. A force that once treated different particles as identical now differentiates them. Some excitations gain mass, others remain light. The poetry remains in the equations, but the music has shifted keys. If all of that feels abstract, hold a simpler picture. You are looking at a blank page. Every story is possible. No character yet exists. Then the first line appears. The page is no longer symmetric. It favors a particular path. That line leads to a second, and suddenly there are constraints and consequences. Was there something from nothing? In one sense, yes. Structure bloomed where none was visible. In another sense, no. There was always a grammar waiting, and the act of writing simply selected one sentence among many that the grammar allowed. The early universe might have passed through several such gentle tilts as it cooled. At higher energies, different forces could have been facets of a single symmetry. As the cosmic temperature fell, that symmetry became shy, hiding pieces of itself, letting forces take on separate flavors. In these transitions, particles that had no mass learned to carry weight, others changed their partnerships. The details are careful and debated, but the theme is steady. Poised states tend to choose when conditions lean, and once chosen, the world wears that choice in everything that follows. There is a delicate cousin to this, the idea of a false vacuum. Picture a landscape of hills and valleys, the true resting place. The deepest valley lies somewhere far, but a nearer, shallower valley might catch a rolling ball. It settles there and calls it home for a time. The field's vacuum in this metaphor is false, because it is stable enough to linger, but not absolute. If conditions change, or if a rare fluctuation opens a narrow pass, the ball might tunnel to the deeper valley. This image has been used to sketch scenarios where a universe inhabits a metastable state that later changes, releasing stored energy into new forms. Again, the phrase something from nothing tempts us, but the nothing here is a very particular something, a field resting in a high, quiet place, heavy with possibility. We can feel the edges of a larger question pressing softly at our sleeve. Could the universe, poised in a symmetric state, have become the textured cosmos we see, simply because symmetry doesn't like to sit forever? Perhaps when pressure builds beneath ice, it cracks and refreezes into more stable patterns. When the even distribution of air in a room meets a warm radiator and a cool window, curls of convection self-organize. These are not miracles. They are natural consequences of rules meeting conditions. The phrase spontaneous order sometimes makes them sound mysterious. They are simply what happens when preferred arrangements present themselves, and noise, those tiny everywhere fluctuations, nudges the system to choose. A very quiet thread runs under these stories: symmetry and conservation. In physics, every symmetry in time or space corresponds to a conserved quantity energy, momentum, charge. When a symmetry is hidden by a choice, the associated conservation law can still hold, but it expresses itself through new companions, new routes for bookkeeping. Gauge fields appear, like ushers ensuring the theatre's rules remain respected as the seating changes. This is deep and yet homely. The universe keeps its promises, but it sometimes keeps them in ways we didn't anticipate until we learnt the finer print. What about creation? The word that slips into our mouths when we say from nothing. Here kindness is due. If by creation we mean the emergence of structure from a poised, symmetric state, then creation happens whenever water freezes, whenever salt crystallizes, whenever a violin string, bowed, leaps from silence into a note. The note wasn't in the wood alone, or in the horsehair, or in the air. It was in the relation laws meeting boundary conditions, symmetry meeting a tilt. The universe's earliest phases may have sung their first notes this way, quiet fields choosing, and the choice flowering into familiar difference. There is a modest chronology one can hum without forcing the tune. In the hottest moments, symmetries were broad-shouldered, the distinctions we now rely on blurred. As cooling proceeded, one symmetry hid, then another. Particles gained their specific personalities. Forces settled into their current strengths. Later, even later, chemistry learned its favorite dances. Stars learned to fuse, and the quiet seeds from earlier were amplified into galaxies. It reads like a poem, not because we wish it to, but because the logic of phases lends itself to verses. Our parallel lives echo this. A winter field looks blank, and then one morning, the grass lifts a white lace of frost. A blank page becomes a letter that changes a year. A room that seems silent tilts when a refrigerator motor sighs into life. And suddenly the silence is not what it was. We live inside spontaneous tilts and call them days. If the mind wants a final anchor, let it be this. Something from nothing is often structure from symmetry. The symmetry is the lake. The structure is the ripple that chooses a direction. The act of choice is not lawless. It is guided by a landscape of possibilities that the laws themselves outline. What feels like conjuring is a subtle compliance, poise becoming pattern, because poise under the right conditions always does. And as you drift, if you like, return to the ponded dusk. The surface at first is perfect. Then a fish turns beneath, or a breeze touches down. Concentric rings wander out, and the world gains texture. The quiet was not broken. It became articulate. Late at night, when a cafe closes and someone counts the till, there's a small relief in balancing the books. Numbers that could have drifted align. Columns agree. The day's story fits inside a sum. We look for such comfort in the cosmos. If a universe can arise, expand and grow ornate, perhaps its ledger energy in all its guises closes politely. Some have whispered that the grand total might be zero, a balance between what is stored and what is owed, between what rises and what falls. It's a soothing thought. It is also one that asks for careful handling, because the universe keeps accounts in a language more intricate than ours. Begin simply. In familiar physics, energy is conserved. It changes form, moves between systems, hides as heat or rises as motion, but the total remains steady. This promise is anchored to a symmetry in time. When the rules don't change from one moment to the next, the sum we call energy has a reason to stay put. In a room with steady walls and no leaks, this is a tidy truth. But our universe is not a room with fixed walls. The walls are the room, and they stretch. Space expands. Distances lengthen. Clocks in different places disagree in honorable ways, because gravity curves the stage. In such a world, energy's conservation becomes local rather than global. In any small region, if you write the equations gently, energy and momentum flow consistently. Their divergence vanishes, a formal way to say what leaves one corner enters another. Yet when you stand back and try to count everything everywhere at once, the meaning of total slips. The theatre lacks a single universal clock that could anchor the sum. The columns we'd like to add live on ledgers whose lines don't align. This is not a flaw, it is the geometry speaking. In a static universe, a room with a well-defined, timeless rhythm, global energy conservation makes sense. In a dynamic, expanding universe, the notion of a single overarching energy sum is not always well defined. We can still talk about energy densities, how much energy per unit volume in matter, in radiation, in the quiet pressure of the vacuum, and we can watch those densities change as the fabric stretches. But when we ask for the grand total, we must admit we might be asking a question the universe has not taught us to phrase. And yet the whisper persists. Maybe the contributions cancel. Gravity, after all, stores energy in the relations between masses, and that energy is negative. Lift a stone against gravity, you add energy to the stone. Earth system, let it fall, the system gives energy back as motion. If you picture the cosmos assembling from an initial smoothness, gravity's clumping could in principle carry negative energy that balances the positive energy of matter and radiation. Add to that the possibility that space's own expansion does work, and that the pressure associated with different contents, radiation, dust-like matter, vacuum energy, changes the way the ledger tallies. The image of a zero-sum universe is attractive, a cosmic book where every credit finds its debit, where existence itself is an even equation. It tells a gentle story. The universe borrowed nothing and owes nothing. It is in a precise sense free, but we must handle the idea with warm gloves. In general relativity, the theory that feeds these thoughts, defining a total energy for the whole universe, depends on having a kind of symmetry, an overarching time translation anchor that our expanding space lacks. In special cases, like an isolated system in an otherwise empty, unchanging space-time, we can define total energy cleanly. For the entire cosmos, the definition is slippery. Some ways of counting suggest balance, others politely refrain from answering. Rather than chase a single sum, it may be kinder to watch how each account behaves. Radiation, light, and neutrinos loses energy as the universe expands, not only because its density thins, but because each photon's wavelength stretches, lowering its energy. Matter, cold, slow compared to light, thins as volumes grow. Its energy per particle remains essentially steady, but the number per room falls. The vacuum, if it truly has a constant energy density, grows with space. More room means more of that quiet pressure. To keep the ledger true locally, the geometry itself participates. Expansion is not a passive background, but an actor, exchanging with content so that the equations remain exact. In every small patch, this exchange can be felt in the way different components push or pull on the expansion. Radiation resists gravity more than matter does. Its pressure is positive and large. The vacuum's pressure is peculiar. It is negative, acting as a gentle anti-gravity that accelerates expansion. Here, pressure is a way of speaking about how an energy source contributes to the curvature of space-time. It's the furniture's arrangement, not just the amount in the room, that matters for the room's shape. There is a quieter question, older than these accounts. If the ledger balances, does that answer how something came from nothing? Perhaps it softens the worry, but does not complete it. A zero total does not imply an origin without structure. It is a statement about sums, not mechanisms, and if the sums themselves are undefined globally, the comfort must come from a different place, from local honesty, from the consistency of flow, from the way the universe treats every small exchange with care. A human parallel may help. In a family home, food moves from pantry to plate, warmth from fire to room, words from one heart to another. You could count calories and degrees, but the life of the house is not captured by a single number at day's end. What matters is that no corner steals, that what leaves one shelf feeds another table, that if the dog is asleep by the door, it is because somewhere a hand turned the latch and let the day in. Conservation lives locally, in the integrity of each passage. Still, it is soothing to sketch the canonical accounts. Matter's energy dwindles per unit volume as space grows, like marbles in an expanding box. Radiation's energy falls faster, marbles that also shrink as the box expands. Vacuum energy, if present as a constant density, seems to rise with volume, as if the box makes more marbles for itself, each the same size. Gravity's negative energy keeps its own counsel, not assigned to marbles, but to the distances between them. When matter clumps, the gravitational account grows more negative. When things spread, it grows less so. These opposing motions can, in some monols, align in a way that leaves the sum near zero. but near and some are words we use carefully. The true sentence is longer and curved. There is also the entropic ledger, related but distinct. As the universe expands, entropy, the number of ways the world's micro details can arrange themselves without changing the overall look, tends to increase. Gravity complicates this in a lovely way. While clumping seems like a move toward order, gravity's version of order includes deep wells, where energy can be relentlessly dissipated, stars that return heat to space, black holes that store enormous entropy behind horizons. A universe that forms structure is not becoming simpler, it is writing itself more possibilities for how heat and light can wander into quiet. The arrow of time is inked in those increasing options. Energy and entropy talk to each other through the expansion, one setting the budget, the other setting the direction. Where does this leave our midnight question? Perhaps here, the universe's ledger may not be a single page with a neat total. It is a living set of accounts, balanced locally by the geometry that hosts them. In that sense, nothing does not offer a simple zero to which we can compare the whole. Instead, the vacuum, our best candidate for cosmic quiet, has its own balance sheet, its own pressure and energy, its own conversation with space. When we imagine the beginning as a transition from one accounting style to another, from one kind of energy dominance to a calmer mix, we are not doing metaphysics so much as narrating a change in bookkeeping. If a gentle chronology soothes this, at first, perhaps, a near constant energy filled the young cosmos, pushing space to expand quickly. When that energy changed its form, the familiar hot plasma emerged, carrying a budget that thinned as the room grew. Light lost energy to stretching, matter diluted, and later, when stars forged complex elements, local ledgers blossomed. Heat here, radiation there, stored chemical potential in dusty clouds. Much later still, the vacuum's quiet pressure began to dominate again, easing the expansion into a new accelerating phase. Through it all, local exchanges remained honest. The page margins blurred, but the script within each paragraph stayed true. Return briefly to your own body's accounting. You breathed in earlier, oxygen rode your blood to where it was needed. Sugars stored from the day were spent to maintain warmth, to shape a thought, to turn a memory gently in the mind's hand. The total energy available to you changed form, then form again, and none of this required a universal sum. It required only that each small trade be faithful. Trusting the local truth can be enough to let sleep find you. Before you let go, consider a final picture. You stand at the shore at night, waves arrive, spend themselves, and slide back. The sea keeps no single number that captures its life. It is currents within currents, balances within balances, a ledger that makes sense in each eddy even if the whole cannot be counted at once. The cosmos may be like that. Not a trick, not a loophole, but a vast, sincere honesty played out locally everywhere. If there is comfort, it may be this: nothing vital is lost by releasing the demand for a global sum. The universe is trustworthy in the ways that matter for living inside it. It does not conjure energy from thin air in a way that ruins the story. It trades, transforms, and lets geometry bear the difference where our words falter. And in the quiet, where words do falter, you may find that sleep too balances its books, closing the day with a soft zero, while the deeper sea of night keeps moving, faithful and whole. On a clear night you might tilt your head back and feel the sky as a single quiet dome, one unbroken velvet. But if you linger, you begin to notice textures. The Milky Way threads a pale river, a cold star holds steady while a satellite glides. Darkness itself seems to come in shades: charcoal, bruise blue, velvet black. Depending on where you look, what felt like one thing, the night reveals many faces when your eyes adjust. So it may be with the vacuum. We begin by calling it empty space, the simplest quiet. Then we learn it hums with fields, and we accept that quiet can have a pulse. With more patience, other textures appear: ground states and near-ground states, stable bowls and shallow basins, a geography of possibilities that the universe might inhabit at different times or in different regions. In this gentler language, vacuum is not singular, it is a family name. Start where the picture is smoothest. A A true vacuum, in the physicist's voice, is the deepest rest available to the fields, the lowest energy configuration, the quietest note the instrument can hold. From there, excitations arise as particles, and the rules we've measured, the ones that describe how light travels, how matter binds, flow from that resting place. But the landscape those fields inhabit can have more than one valley. There can be a nearby hollow that is almost as low, inviting in its shallowness, and easy to slip into. If a field settles there, it will call that place home for a while. This is a false vacuum, a poised condition that feels like final rest until a deeper rest is revealed. We can picture it with a child's marble and a wooden bowl. If the bowl is gently walked, the marble might find a small dimple near the rim. It settles there, quiet and still, as if it has finished its journey. Another nudge, and it discovers the true hollow at the center, rolling down to a calmer sleep. The marble's pause was real. Its stillness was a kind of truth, but the geometry offered a truer stillness, hidden until the path opened. These multiple resting places can carry different properties. In one valley, a particular symmetry might hide. In another, it might show itself. Masses and forces. The music we hear as the world depend on which resting place the fields choose. Nothing, then, is not a single note. It is a room where the furniture can be rearranged, and the arrangement quietly changes the echo. The idea of a false vacuum leads to a thought that can sound dramatic, but need not be: transitions. If a field lingers in a shallower hollow, it can, rarely, hop to the deeper one through a process we nickname tunneling. The phrase is whimsical, but points to a real feature of quantum life. Systems sometimes cross barriers they cannot climb classically by exploring the small but nuzzy chance of being where, by blunt arithmetic, they shouldn't. In a vacuum transition, this hop would not happen everywhere at once. It would begin somewhere, like frost first forming along a fence. A bubble of the new vacuum would appear, and if conditions allow, it would grow, converting its surroundings as it went. Let's hold this gently, because the imagery can run away with us. We are speaking of deep, rare events in a theoretical landscape, not forecasting a midnight surprise. The important idea is simple. What looks like empty space may have layers, and those layers may change over enormous durations. A multiform vacuum means that nothing can learn new habits as the universe evolves. If we widen the view, some thinkers imagine an even broader geography, a landscape with many valleys arranged in a terrain far larger than any map we could carry. In such a panorama, the laws we observe might be local customs, the result of our region's chosen resting place. Other regions, unreachable in practice, could rest in other valleys where the customs differ. This is a picture often called by a word that can glitter too brightly: multiverse, and it asks for extra care. It's not a celebration of infinite everything, it is a proposal that the vacuum has many options, and cosmic history under certain conditions explores more than one. We do not need to climb too far into that terrain to sleep well. It's enough to accept a softer thought. The vacuum is not a rigid, featureless slab. It is a subtle medium whose properties can vary with context. In the early universe, as temperatures fell, the vacuum likely changed its character, much as water changes to ice, through phase transitions that hid or revealed symmetries. In later chapters of cosmic time, the vacuum's faint pressure may again set the pace for expansion, a slow hand resting on the clock. All along, nothing participates, not as a passive blankness, but as a changing backdrop that guides what can be. A small chronology hums beneath this. At high energies, the vacuum may have been perched in a different arrangement, the field's resting values distinct from today's. As the cosmos cooled, transitions occurred, the marble rolled, one valley exchanged for another. Particle families took on their present masses, forces differentiated into their current strengths. The afterglow's pattern was set against this migrating background, carrying in its grain the memory of where the vacuum had settled. Later, the vacuum's own energy, if it behaves as a constant density, began to whisper again, encouraging an acceleration that thins the sky's web on the largest scales. Human life keeps little versions of this story in its pocket. A quiet house at 2 a.m. seems simply silent, But silence has varieties. The hush of snowfall feels different from the hush of summer heat after a fan switches off. The silence of a library is different from the silence of a cathedral. Same word, different character. Your body knows the difference the moment you step inside. The vacuum's many faces may be like that. States that share a name but not a mood. What happens if a vacuum changes suddenly? The gentle answer is, it depends on the terrain. Some transitions end softly, releasing stored energy into the familiar broth of particles and light. The way a coiled spring warms your hand as it unwinds. Others, in tales we tell cautiously, could be abrupt enough to redraw the local rulebook. Those tales make for striking headlines. They also dwell far outside the tempo of a human life, unmoored from any practical worry. Sleep does not have to attend to them. The stars above your roof go on shining under the customs of our current valley. The night's ledger is calm. Even within a single vacuum, there are textures to explore. Quantum fields can settle into coherent patterns. Condensates that behave like single extended waves. Superfluids glide with hardly any friction. Superconductors carry current without resistance when their underlying fields lock into coherence. These are laboratory poems about the vacuum's capacity to organize. They remind us that empty and featureless are not synonyms. Structure emerges because the rules allow it. And when the rules allow it, nature, given time, will try it. All of this folds back into our theme with a soft edge. Nothing, in physics, is a living concept. It is a ground woven from fields whose resting habits can change. It can cradle fluctuations that seed structure. It can carry pressure that sets the universe's pace. It can reserve hidden depths, shallow basins masquerading as final floors. When we ask what existed before, part of the answer is simply a different way for nothing to be. Feel your own room again. The darkness here has a flavor. The smell of wood, the faint tick of a pipe, perhaps a filament's after warmth in a lamp you've just turned off. Another room's dark would be different. We call them both night. We're not wrong. We're just compressing a range of experiences into one syllable. Physics, too, compresses until it remembers to unfold the word and show its colors. If a last image helps, hold this one. A valid meadow under snow. At first it is an unbroken white. Walk it enough, and you begin to notice the terrain, through the snow's thickness, the subtle dips, the places where drifts gather, the sheltered hollows where wind carves thinner layers. The meadow still looks like one thing, but your feet know better. The vacuum is that meadow. The universe has been walking it a very long time, and when you lie down on the snow in imagination, or on your own pillow in the quiet, you can trust that the ground holds. However many faces, nothing may wear. Tonight it is the soft one, the one that lets thoughts settle, and settle again. There is a particular calm on the far side of a lighthouse beam. You watch it rotate, its white sweep gliding over black water, and for a heartbeat the darkness after feels deeper, untouched, perhaps infinite. Our understanding of the universe has a similar rhythm, bright arcs of knowledge sweeping over the sea of questions, leaving for a moment a darker hush beyond. To live at the edge of that light and not be afraid is one of science's quiet arts. How do we know what we know? We listen to old light. We count faint patterns. We build instruments that hold still better than our hands can, that measure whispers of temperature and direction, the cosmic afterglow. The relic light from when the universe first became transparent arrives from every direction with almost exactly the same chill. We have mapped its subtle mottling like cartographers of a dream, finding in those small variations the seeds of everything that would come later. The map is not a photograph of a beginning. It is a record of the last fog thinning, the moment light could travel without constant interruption. Even so, it is a treasure. In its grain, we test the ideas we have about smoothing and stretching, about the kinds of ripples inflation would leave, about the geometry's curve. Closer to home, we watch galaxies lean on each other in clusters, their motions speaking the names of matter we cannot see directly. We watch supernovae, the bright endings of stars, take the measure of distance and time, their light curves becoming yardsticks that suggest the pace of expansion has quickened. We sift radio waves, X-rays, gravitational murmurs, each a new alphabet. We build colliders that nudge particles together, not to break the universe, but to ask it politely how its constituents prefer to dance. These are our methods. Each is a small lighthouse, sweeping its beam across the night, and yet limits appear, not as failures but as boundaries where the map darkens. There is a cosmic speed limit, light speed and distances so large that messages cannot bridge them within the age of the universe. There is cosmic variance, a tender phrase for the fact that we have only one sky to sample. Statistics that could be averaged over many universes must for us be inferred from a single exquisitely detailed canvas. There is the horizon of the afterglow itself. We cannot see past the time when the fog of free electrons scattered every photon, because before that, light could not travel far without losing its story. We infer, we model, we acknowledge the place where direct sight ends. The early instants press their own limit upon us. If we rewind to densities and temperatures so fierce that space-time's smoothness cannot be trusted, our equations start to whisper rather than sing. General relativity and quantum field theory, the twin pillars, are both sturdy and incomplete. At their crossing, a new language is needed. We have candidates, sketches, preludes, but the symphony is not yet written. In that region, words like before and boundary wobble. We can ask them to stand, and they will try, but the floor creaks. It is humane, even restful, to let them sit. On the observational side, we also meet the generosity and the restraint of matter that does not couple strongly to light. The dark in dark matter is not a refusal, it is a shyness. We track it by its gravitational pull, by the way it shepherds galaxies and bends light passing near, by the scaffolding it provides for structure to form. Its nature remains a blank. We outline with care, waiting for a whisper in underground detectors, for a clue in high-energy collisions, for a discrepancy that will narrow the family of possibilities. The vacuum's quiet pressure, the driver of accelerated expansion, is in its empirical outline, even shyer. We call it by a modest name and ask few declarative sentences of it. Its presence is measured by its effect. Its essence remains a room with the lamp off, faintly perfumed by what we think it might contain. There is also the ethical limit, the soft boundary between curiosity and claim. Theories about beginnings are delicate. They lure us towards certainty because the story they promise is grand. In that lure hides a subtle danger, declaring closure before the data has finished speaking. Part of the discipline then is to hold language gently, to say suggests, rather than proves, to keep caveats like warm blankets nearby. This is not timidity, it is accuracy. The universe does not rush, neither should our sentence. A small chronology of method is soothing to remember. First, we learn the sky's rough geometry, the way stars gather, the structure of the Milky Way. Then we discovered that other galaxies are receding, that space itself grows. We learned to read the afterglow as a child learns letters, at first seeing only smudges, then discerning fine patterns that revealed the universe's contents and curvature with surprising precision. We built telescopes that see beyond the human eye's narrow band, instruments that detect vibrations in the fabric of space-time itself. Along the way, we made mistakes, corrected them, and made better ones. Each correction was not a defeat, but a deepening, like sharpening a lens, and seeing at last that the blur was not a cloud, but a flock of starlings. At the edge of these methods, we meet questions that may stay soft for a very long time. Is time emergent, like temperature, appearing only when enough degrees of freedom hum together? Are the laws we read universal in the strictest sense, or local customs of our vacuum's valley? Do multiple valleys get visited within one cosmic history, in transitions we might someday infer from fossil patterns in the sky's polarization or the statistics of structure? Each question has a path to observation that is narrow, winding, and perhaps partly overgrown. We walk as far as the lantern's oil allows. There is comfort too in the recognition that not all knowing is of the same flavor. Some truths are precise numbers you can recite. This much helium in the primordial mix, that much curvature in the largest geometry, a particular tilt in the afterglow's ripples. Other truths are shapes, expansion, not explosion, rounded edge rather than sharp, vacuum with character rather than blank. Shapes are not lesser, they are frameworks that guide which numbers we should seek next. At night, A coastline seen from a cliff is first a silhouette. Only later do we name coves and rocks. Consider a quieter edge, closer to your pillow, the moment before sleep. You cannot measure it with a watch. You cannot pinpoint the last thought that belonged to the waking day and the first that belonged to a dream. You could, perhaps, record a brain's rhythms, write down frequencies, label waves. Useful, yes. But the experience retains a softness even with all that data. It's not a failure of method. It is the nature of thresholds. Science lives with thresholds. The Planck-thin threshold where current theories blur, the observational threshold beyond the afterglow, the practical threshold of instruments and budgets, of weather and time, the human threshold of attention, of the will to test and retest. On each threshold, humility is not only a virtue, it is a tool. It keeps us from claiming more than the light permits. It keeps us calm in the face of the sea. And what of nothing, our companion all along? At the edge of knowing, nothing is a mirror. It shows us the outlines of our questions, the difference between absence and readiness, between an empty page and a page with a faint watermark, between a hallway outside time and a curve within it, where before loses its place. When we ask, how did nothing exist before the Big Bang? We are, in part, asking how far our methods can carry words like exist and before into a domain where clocks and rulers have not yet learned their roles. The honest answer is simple and kind. As far as our light reaches, we can speak with care. Beyond that, we can speak in metaphors, in models that volunteer to be replaced when better light arrives. Let your jaw loosen a little. Notice the coolness in the air as you breathe in, the gentle warmth on the way out. The body is an instrument, measuring its own weather without numbers. It knows when to rest, because patterns across the day add up to a shape. Our knowledge of the cosmos is similar, a living sum of patterns, numbers, shapes, and silences. We do not wait for perfect certainty to feel at home under the stars. We accept the lighthouse's sweep, and we love the darkness after too. If you need a closing picture, return to that beam. It circles, steady, the lens clicking softly as it turns. Far out, a small wave catches the light and brightens for a second, then falls back into shadow. The sea is no less real in the dark. The next sweep will come, our questions are safe there, resting on the black water until the light passes again. Ahead of us, the story bends toward meaning, the way humans carry these shapes into our lives, and then to a soft return where nothing becomes an invitation to rest rather than a cliff to fear. For now, float at the edge of the beam. The sea is friendly, the night is long enough. There is a particular texture to midnight. On a weekday, windows mostly dark, a lone train crossing a bridge, a dog settling twice before it chooses a corner. If you step outside and listen, the city seems to hold its breath. Our ancestors felt something like this when oil lamps dwindled and hearths became embers. The mind, meeting this lull, reaches for images. We are a species of metaphor. We map the unknown onto what we can touch. Nothing has always invited such mapping. A blank page, a winter field, a silent room after the music stops. Each offers a nearness we understand. And yet, after our long walk through cosmology, we know the word refuses any single costume. In physics, nothing is a vacuum with temperament. In philosophy, it is the absence of even a stage. In daily life, it is simply not much happening. When we carry those meanings back into our human rooms, what do they teach us about how to live and how to rest? Begin with the page. Every writer knows the slight chill of the first inch of white. The page looks like absence, but it's not. It carries grammar, history, 1,000 remembered cadences, those invisible structures, letters, words. The way our language leans on subject and verb are the field on which sentences will soon ripple. The physicist vacuum, humming with potential even when no particles dance, is a cousin to that page. The lesson is tender. What looks like nothing may be a readiness. In our days, pauses are not voids. They are conditions from which shape can grow without violence. A morning with no plans is not a failure. It is a field that allows a walk, a call, a thought to form without hurry. Consider silence. Musicians, treat rests as active marks. A rest is a shaped quiet. It lets a note before it bloom, and the note after lean in. The universe too seems to have used rests when the vacuum's pressure set the pace, phases when symmetry held steady until softly it shows, entropy's tide, inflation's smoothing, the long decades of starlight. Each is a movement with pauses that matter. We might take from this a domestic wisdom. The breath between tasks is part of the music of the day. We cannot play a symphony on an unbroken note. We cannot live a life without intervals. Then there is the curve, the no-boundary image, time turning gently into space. Near the beginning gave us a lake's shore rather than a cliff. Our human lives offer the same geometry at their edges. We do not wake by striking a border. We curve into awareness. We do not sleep by falling off. We arc away. Seasons turn, grief eases, joy fades into a quieter brightness. If we ask, what was I before I fell asleep? The honest answer is a smile. The map curves. There is no single line that divides. The cosmic metaphor returns us to patience with our thresholds. Meaning too seems to favor thresholds. Think of a newborn's room in the dim hour before sunrise. Clothes folded, a chair set by the window, that smell of clean cotton and unopened books. Nothing happens, yet everything is happening. A life is about to be filled. The poised state is warm with intention. In the sciences, we learn to call poised states symmetric or metastable. In the heart, we call them anticipation. The message beneath both: don't mistake quiet for lack. A still lake keeps a sky. Our species has always told origin stories. Some are crisp and mythic. A word spoke, a light appeared. Others are cycles, worlds born, worlds damped, worlds return. The modern tale, with its expansion and smoothing and fields that choose, does not demand that older stories be thrown away. It asks rather that we treat them as metaphors, that knew they were metaphors. A garden is not less beautiful because you now know the soil's pH. A dawn is not less moving because you can name Rayleigh's scattering. Knowledge, carried softly, deepens awe. It doesn't puncture it. If we lightly sketch a chronology of meanings, it might hum like this. In very old text, nothing often meant not formed, not ordered, without shape. The world was watery or desert or blank, waiting for a word. Later, philosophers tried to refine the term until it meant absence with no remainder, no matter, no place, no law. Then physics arrived with vacua and fields, with the recognition that empty space is an actor. Each era's nothing matched the tools it trusted. We are not obliged to choose one forever. We can hold several at once. Use the absolute absence for certain questions of first cause, the vacuum for questions of mechanism, the daily not much for questions of rest. What of the arrow of time? That quiet tilting toward the future which made life, memory and narrative possible. It suggests a paradoxical comfort. The universe made room for us by beginning in an unlikely order. That order has been flowing into variety ever since, like a stream acquiring branches. Meaning for a human life within that stream may be less about resisting the flow and more about placing small stones in the water. Rituals, promises, calendars that let us cross. Our why am I here leans on what shall I do with this morning, and who shall I hold. Answers are local, like energy's conservations. They are honest in each corner, even if no single number sums them all. We can also turn to loss, a subject. Night understands. A room after someone leaves can feel like a physical absence. The air oddly larger. Physics does not touch grief, but it offers a metaphor that sometimes steadies the hand. A vacuum in which a field's value has changed, feels different, behaves differently, yet the stage remains. In our lives, when the furniture of days rearranges, the field of love can take a new expectation value. The same room, a different, quiet, not less, different. To name that difference is to begin to live with it. In art, emptiness frames meaning. The white around ink, the pause before a dancer moves, the negative space that lets the eye breathe. We learnt this from caves and kilns and cathedrals. Physics simply returned the lesson at a different scale. The night sky is not meaningful because it is sprinkled with stars. It is meaningful because the dark lets the stars be seen. When you build your day, leave the margins wide. It is tempting, faced with these resonances, to declare that the universe means something simple and permanent for us. But the honest comfort is softer. The cosmos is vast, old and precise enough to host lives like ours. It did not have to be. That it is may not be an answer in itself, but it is an invitation to gratitude without fever, to wonder without alarm, to rest without fear that resting is wasted time. Nothing understood as readiness, as curved threshold, as the ground that hums with possibility becomes an ally. Tonight, leaning into sleep, you can let the question that brought us here fold into that ally. It will be there in the morning, like a book turned face down, awaiting the next page. If a final human image helps, return to the lighthouse. You are not the beam, you are the keeper who tends the lamp. Some nights are rough, some glass panes need mending, but the work is steady. Keep the oil topped, the wick trimmed. That steadiness is meaning enough, and its rhythm fits the universe's patient song. The sea is wide, the light is small, the relationship is everything. Let your shoulders soften, let the word nothing loosen into what it has learned to be. A field of readiness, a pause that holds, a curve that completes without an edge. We have one chapter left, a soft return, and then perhaps a longer sleep. Imagine a shoreline at first light, not sunrise yet, just that pearled hour when the sea is pewter and the gulls have not decided whether to speak. The tide has written and erased and written again. If you kneel and look closely, you'll see the day's first ripples forming with no hurry at all. The world is rehearsing itself. In that rehearsal lives our answer. We asked, how did nothing exist before the Big Bang? And step by patient step, we turned the word until its facets showed. We learned that everyday nothing, the quiet room, is fullness at low volume. Philosophical nothing, the absolute absence, may lie outside the reach of clocks and rulers altogether. Physical nothing, the vacuum, is a fabric with fields, a readiness that can ripple, a stage that can curve, a mood that can change. We learn that before may be a misfit word if time is part of the play, that beginnings can be rounded, that a smoothing called inflation could iron the early creases, that symmetries, when they tilt, grow structure like frost. We discovered that the cosmic ledger is kept locally and honestly. Even if no single total satisfies a ledger's craving, we walk through the vacuum's many faces, the possibility of shallow and deep rists in the fields, the chance that distant rooms in an untraveled geography might keep different customs. We held the edge of knowing with kindness, instruments shining, horizons reminding, humility serving as both method and balm. And then, gently, we brought the question home to meaning, to pages and rests and curves, to our own rooms where sleep arrives not as a fall, but as a soft turn. What does it all teach about rest? Perhaps this: rest is not the negation of life. It is a phase where life keeps its promises in quieter ways. Your body does not become nothing when you sleep. It becomes a vacuum of a different face, housekeeping, memory sorting, repair, a readiness that hums. The universe begins not from a blank, but from a poised condition that allows becoming. You sleep not from a blank, but from a poised condition that allows healing. Both are continuities wearing threshold. Another lesson: let edges be rounded. Do not demand a cliff. Let the evening curve into night without a ceremony of closure. Let the morning curve out of sleep without a trumpet. The no-boundary picture, whatever its ultimate fate in the lab's language, offers a humane shape for daily life. We move through curves. We can afford to be patient with them. A further lesson: keep margins. The cosmos needed vast quiet to let galaxies shimmer, time enough for light to walk and for matter to gather. Your day needs pockets of quiet to let thoughts condense. A pause is not lost time. It is the vacuum that lets particles take shape. If a room is overfilled, nothing can move. If a day is overfilled, meaning has nowhere to sit. One more. Trust small fluctuations. Those tiny quantum whispers, swept outward during inflation, seeded the web of galaxies. In our lives, small choices, calling a friend, Stepping outside, placing a book by the bed, seed structure 2. We don't always need to plan a universe. We can nudge one. The long arc is built from faint ripples. And a last, learn to love horizons. There are things we will never know, regions with which we'll never exchange messages, questions that remain dark water beyond the lighthouse's sweep. The modern instinct is to be restless under such a sky. Tonight we try a quieter posture. A horizon is not a wall, it is the shape of a relationship. It says, within this circle, your light will reach. Beyond it, the sea keeps its own counsel. That is not loss, it is form. Meaning grows against edges. Sleep too grows against an edge, the one between waking thought and the wordless care that follows. If a chronology soothes you, hum it softly now. There is a poised quiet feels present. Time perhaps not yet unfolded in the way clocks require. There is a curve, not a cliff. There is a smoothing that lays down a calm evenness. There is a handover to a bright, hot youth. There is a long adolescence of stars, a maturity of worlds, a late life widening as the vacuum's pressure reasserts itself. Within that arc, there are rooms like this one, where a person rests and asks large questions with a small voice. The question is not a burden, it is a lullaby. It sings the truth that we live in a universe where pauses are fertile. We can return one by one to the images that kept us company, and let them hang like framed prints on the wall of a quiet house. A pond at dusk, symmetrical until one ring widens. A reminder that symmetry delights in becoming articulate. A fogged window, then a slow palm clearing a circle. The feel of inflation without noise. A globe under your hand, where north of north dissolves. The shape of a beginning that owns its curve. A cafe ledger, honest in each corner, uninterested in a single grand total. The ethic of local conservation. A valid meadow under snow, its terrain felt by careful feet. The vacuum's many faces, a lighthouse's revolving beam, and the friendly darkness after, the method and the limit. Sweeping and resting, a winter field that looks blank until you kneel and sense the seeds, the difference between absence and readiness. A blank page that somehow already carries the memory of letters, the way structure can be invited without being forced. These images don't solve the paradox. They teach us how to sit with it. That, in the end, is the art of rest. Sitting kindly with what is unsolved, trusting that the universe which has kept its ledgers and curves so well, keeps this too. There will be days again when urgency feels loud, when the mind tries to turn mystery into cliff-edge fear. Those are good days to remember that nothing is often another word for patience. A physics-ready patience. Structured, fertile, honest. A human patience, forgiving, gentle, full of room. The night is large enough to hold both. If you're still hovering near waking, you might let your attention settle into the small constructions around you. The corner where two walls meet, the seam in a curtain, the way a book's spine remembers the pressure of a thumb. Everything is quietly faithful to its form. In the same way, your body will keep its promises as you sleep. Breath will rise and fall. Cells will repair, memory will braid, the universe will go on, expanding invisibly through the hours, a black tide that leaves silver behind. And if sleep has already come, if these last words reach you only as a soft weather far away, that is perfect. The question that brought us here does not require an answer to be kind. It requires a posture head on pillow, shoulders unknotted, heart listening the way the sea listens to the moon.